The U.S.S. Oberon cruised silently through the depths of the Orion expanse, a region so remote and uncharted that even its stars felt eerie, distant, and cold. Captain Liam Marek sat in his command chair, his gaze fixed on the forward viewport. Space stretched endlessly ahead, a realm of beauty and emptiness he had once found awe-inspiring, but now seemed indifferent and cruel. After years of service, he had seen more dead worlds and barren landscapes than he cared to remember. It was Arden Cho, their sharp-eyed navigator, who first caught something unusual in the ship's sensor readouts. She leaned closer, squinting as if the data would become clearer under her scrutiny. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange." Captain Marek turned his chair, his interest piqued. Arden was known for her precision. She didn't report anomalies unless they were worth investigating. "What have you got, Cho?" I don't know. A faint signal, almost like it's struggling to get through." He motioned to Silva Ares, the ship's communications officer, who was already working to isolate the signal, fingers gliding over her console with focused urgency. Silva frowned as she adjusted the frequency, fine-tuning the static into something coherent. She glanced at Marek, her normally calm expression tinged with concern. "Sir, it's definitely a distress call, but it's fragmented, like it's been scattered across time and space," she said, her voice a low murmur. "It's coming from a nearby star system, a few light years out." Captain Marek leaned forward, eyes narrowing. A distress call in this quadrant was odd. They were far beyond any known trade routes, and no records mentioned colonies or research stations in this sector. Curiosity gnawed at him, tempered by a growing sense of unease. A distress call, that old, usually meant trouble. "Patch it through," he ordered. The bridge speakers crackled, filling the silent expanse of the command deck with a sound that scraped like nails on metal. It was a guttural hum, layered with fragmented whispers and shuddering pulses of static. The sound fluctuated wildly, as if it were more alive than a simple transmission. Arden leaned back, clearly disturbed. Is it speaking?" Silva shook her head slowly, pale but professional. "Not exactly. The signal is old, maybe even centuries. Whatever language it's in has degraded, like it's been chewed up by space and time." As they listened, Silva continued to work, filtering out interference and adjusting modulation. Soon, the distorted hum resolved into something almost recognizable. A voice, faint and distorted, echoed through the bridge, crackling with fear and desperation. Each word was stretched and warped, but the plea was unmistakable. "To anyone out there, we are the last. They are here. Stay away. We cannot. It's coming. Please, save." A chilling silence settled over the crew as the voice faded back into static, like a whisper carried off by the wind. Each crew member felt a creeping sense of dread, an awareness that something terrible had happened to whoever sent the call. Dr. Elara Hesse, the ship's biologist, broke the silence. "That voice, it sounds..." She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "It sounds as though it's not just asking for help. It's warning us." Captain Marek exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the hollow expanse of stars on the viewfinder. "The signal's coming from that star system, right?" "Yes, sir," Silva replied. "It's locked to a single planet, one with signs of an atmosphere and an array of structures, though all reading as dormant." The captain tapped his fingers on the console, weighing their options. So we have a distress call from a dead planet, originating from what was likely a highly advanced civilization, and it's been drifting in space for God knows how long. Auden spoke up, voice firm yet cautious. If they're advanced enough to send a signal that's survived this long, we might be dealing with a technology we don't understand, or a civilization that met a terrible end. Dr. Hesse nodded, thoughtful. Captain, if there are remnants of a society advanced enough to send this kind of message, I'd recommend we investigate. The scientific value alone could be astronomical, and if there's a chance we could help. Marek nodded, steeling himself. We go, but I want every precaution taken. Suit up and secure all readings. We don't know what happened there, and I'd rather not find out the hard way. The Oberon adjusted its course, a subtle shudder running through the ship as its engines redirected them toward the mysterious planet. Tension filled the cabin as they broke through the edge of its atmosphere, descending toward a world blanketed in an impenetrable layer of ashen clouds. Their scanners went haywire as the fog thickened, scrambling data as though something in the atmosphere fought to keep secrets hidden. When the ship touched down, the planet's eerie quiet washed over them, more unsettling than any hostile welcome. A dark fog clung to the surface, dense and gelatinous, creating a dismal landscape. Shapes of massive structures emerged from the mist, towering skeletal remnants of what had once been a vibrant city. Now they stood silent, hollow, watching the new intruders like ghosts. Atmosphere is breathable, but I'd advise respirators, Dr. Hesse murmured, running diagnostics on her handheld device. There's something unusual in the air, some kind of particulate matter, organic. Captain Marek led the crew as they disembarked, stepping out into the dense, cloying fog. The ground was spongy beneath their feet, covered in an organic, slimy residue that squished with each step. An acrid scent filled the air, sharp and metallic, laced with something more disturbing. A faint, sickly sweetness that clung to their senses. As they moved toward the nearest structure, a tower partially collapsed, but still imposing, the signal grew stronger, echoing through the haze in a series of pulsating vibrations that felt almost alive. Silva adjusted her handheld receiver, eyes widening. Captain, it's responding to us. The signal's increasing as we approach. A shiver passed through them all, an instinctive, primal response to something alien and deeply wrong. Whatever had happened here, it was waiting, and the planet itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with their steps, drawing them in. The first sign of the bodies appeared near the base of the tower. Twisted forms, almost unrecognizable, lay half-buried in the sludge, their skeletal remains fused to the metallic ground. Limbs were distorted, elongated in ways that defied natural anatomy. Some were partially melted into the structure itself, as if trying to escape some unseen horror in their final moments. Dr. Hess knelt, her face twisted in both fascination and horror as she studied one of the corpses. This is like nothing I've ever seen. Their biology seems altered, almost melted. It's as though the planet itself consumed them. Captain Marek's jaw tightened as he looked around, sensing movement in the fog. A faint shiver of something too quick to identify. Whatever happened here, they didn't die naturally. Keep your eyes open. As they moved deeper into the city, they found more of the same, a vast, deserted landscape punctuated by nightmarish remains, an endless graveyard. The buildings were covered in strange organic growths, pulsing faintly like the faintest of heartbeats, as if the entire city had once been alive, but now lingered on the edge of death. Finally, they reached the source of the signal, a massive obelisk-like structure that pulsed with a dim, ominous glow. Its surface was covered in alien glyphs, each symbol contorted and spiraling, like twisted faces frozen in silent screams. The resonance from the obelisk felt like a heartbeat, vibrating in their bones, sending a sensation of dread crawling up their spines. As Silva activated the receiver, the signal blared through their comms, sharper and more frantic. The voice, clearer now, was a deep, guttural wail of despair. "Run! They are here. The last ones. Do not. It waits. The hunger. Stay. Away." A sudden, wet, slithering sound echoed from the shadows. The fog shifted, revealing something massive and sinuous, moving just beyond the range of their lights. Arden's voice broke the silence, her whisper barely audible, her eyes wide with horror. "Captain, something's watching us." They turned slowly, scanning the darkness, but whatever it was had already melted back into the mist. Captain Marek took a steadying breath, gripping his weapon tightly. The warning in the signal rang in his ears, clear and unmistakable. "Whatever you are, we're not here to play." But deep down, he knew. They had already been drawn into something ancient, something lethal, and it was waiting for them. The city stretched endlessly before them, a forest of alien structures half buried in the fog, silent yet looming like ancient sentinels. The crew of the Oberon moved cautiously, their flashlights slicing through the dense haze, illuminating fleeting glimpses of twisted metal and flesh-like textures that seemed to pulse beneath their lights. Each step felt intrusive, as if they were disturbing the restless dreams of something long dead, or perhaps only sleeping. The buildings were unlike anything they had seen, with walls and spires that seemed grown rather than built, twisting up toward the murky, storm-torn sky. These towering forms spiraled in unnatural ways, as though designed by minds that saw in dimensions humans could not fathom. Ilara Hesse, the ship's biologist, stopped every so often to inspect the structures, her gloved fingers brushing against the strange surfaces. "What is it?" Silva asked, her voice hushed, not out of courtesy but instinctive fear. Dr. Hesse stared at the material beneath her fingertips, its texture disturbingly organic. "It's not metal, not stone. There's something almost biological about it, like the entire city is a petrified organism." She paused, removing her hand from the wall as if it burned her. "Whatever it is, it's fused with something organic, and it's pulsing like it's waiting for something." Captain Marek's gaze was fixed on the horizon. "This place, it's like a graveyard." As they moved deeper into the city, they found more evidence of the ancient inhabitants. Corpses littered the ground, tangled in unnatural positions. Each body was warped and fused to the structures, elongated fingers twisted into grotesque gestures, mouths frozen in silent screams. Some appeared to have been caught mid-stride, only for their flesh to have melted into the walls beside them, as if the city had claimed them in their final moments. Leon Stroud, the ship's engineer, knelt beside one of the bodies, his face pale behind his visor. "I've never seen anything like this," he whispered, voice barely a breath. "It's like they were absorbed. The way their skin is melted, it's almost as if the city devoured them." He looked up, horror etched on his face. They're part of the structure now. Captain Marek glanced back, his face unreadable, but his jaw clenched. Stay close. We're not alone here, and whatever did this might still be around. Silva adjusted her equipment, tracking the signal's pulse, which continued to grow stronger as they neared the center of the city. The sound was no longer just a signal. It had become an ambient heartbeat, reverberating through the streets, pressing down on them with an almost tactile weight. They passed an enormous plaza where a shattered fountain stood in the center, its liquid long since dried into a thick, tar-like residue. Around the fountain, the ground was littered with more bodies, each one fused to the cracked stone floor, as if some great force had frozen them mid-scream, sinking them into the ground as though it were quicksand. The air around them grew thicker, tinged with a sickly sweet odor that clung to the back of their throats. Dr. Hesse held up her scanner, the device's screen flickering erratically. There's an unknown energy source here. It's distorting our readings, making it hard to get a clear scan. Captain Marek motioned for them to continue. Stay alert. Whatever this energy is, it's pulling us in. The streets twisted and narrowed as they went deeper into the heart of the city, forcing them into tight passageways that wound between the towering structures. The walls around them pulsed faintly, and the fog seemed to grow thicker, clinging to their faces, seeping into their suits. The deeper they went, the more the city felt less like an abandoned place and more like a slumbering beast watching them with unseen eyes. Finally, they reached the center, a massive dome-shaped structure that dwarfed the other buildings. Its surface was covered in alien glyphs that glowed with a faint, sickly light, writhing and shifting in a way that made the crew's head spin if they looked too long. The entrance to the dome gaped open, dark and foreboding, a maw inviting them in. Silva's voice was a low whisper. It's the source. The signal is coming from inside. They entered, the darkness swallowing them as they moved into the heart of the structure. Their flashlights cast weak beams that barely penetrated the oppressive gloom, illuminating glimpses of the chamber's interior. The walls were lined with more bodies, each one twisted and contorted, pressed against the surfaces like insects trapped in amber. In the center of the room stood a massive artifact, an obelisk carved from a strange, glistening material that seemed to drink in the light. Its surface was covered with intricate patterns, spirals that twisted into themselves, each line almost a scream captured in solid form. Embedded in the obelisk were countless faces, mouths open, eyes hollow, expressions frozen in terror. The artifact pulsed with the same heartbeat they'd been following, its resonance so powerful they felt it in their bones. Dr. Hesse moved closer, transfixed by the horrifying beauty of the structure. This must have been their last attempt to communicate, some kind of distress beacon, a cry for help. Captain Marek circled the artifact, studying it with grim fascination. If this was their last attempt, something went wrong. They weren't just sending a message. It's like they were warning something, or trying to contain it. Before they could analyze further, the wet, slithering sound from before echoed through the chamber. The fog shifted, and they caught their first clear glimpse of it, a massive, sinewy creature, its body slick and covered in semi-translucent scales that refracted the dim light, creating a sickening mirage of twisted faces within its flesh. The creature's form was impossible to pin down, its body constantly shifting, limbs unfurling in a grotesque and organic display, mouths and eyes appearing and disappearing across its surface. It seemed both singular and legion, a fusion of every terrified face embedded in the obelisk, now animated and hungry. Captain Marek shouted, "Back! Move back!" They retreated, but the creature was faster, undulating forward with a speed that belied its massive form. Its limbs, ending in razor-sharp tendrils, lashed out, slicing through the air where Arden had just been standing. She stumbled back, eyes wide with terror, barely avoiding the creature's grasp. Silva fired her weapon, a desperate attempt to deter it, but the creature's body absorbed the impact, its flesh rippling before settling back into place, unharmed. It seemed to feed on their fear, growing more animated, its mouths opening in a silent cacophony of screams. Leon stumbled back, his voice trembling. It's made of them. Those bodies, this thing is them." The creature lunged again, its sinewy body stretching and contorting, tendrils lashing out to ensnare them. One of the tendrils brushed against Leon's arm, and he screamed as it burrowed into his skin, spreading like veins beneath his flesh. His arm turned a sickly gray, his veins darkening as the tendril traveled toward his heart. Captain Marek acted quickly, slicing the tendril with his knife, severing the connection. Leon fell back, panting, his arm covered in pulsating sores that oozed a thick, black fluid. They stumbled back toward the entrance, the creature following, its body shifting and mutating with every step, each of its forms writhing with faces, arms, and mouths that reached out toward them. The creature seemed to draw strength from the city itself, its tendrils connected to the walls, pulsing in time with the obelisk's resonance. As they neared the exit, Silva's voice crackled over the comms. "This creature, it wasn't just attracted to the signal, it is the signal. It's been waiting, surviving off the remnants of this city. They tried to summon help, but instead, they created this." Captain Marek's mind raced, the grim truth settling into place. The alien civilization had unleashed something beyond their control, a creature that fed on their desperation and fear, consuming the very essence of the city and its inhabitants, leaving only this grotesque shell of its former self. "Get to the ship. Now!" Marek barked, his voice filled with a resolve that masked his own terror. They ran, every step echoing in the hollow, pulsating heart of the city. As they crossed the plaza, they saw the creature's tendrils weaving through the fog, reaching for them, as if the city itself had come to life, determined to drag them back into its depths. They reached the Oberon, only to find the tendrils already wrapping around the landing gear, fusing to the ship's hull. Leon quickly rigged the thrusters, firing them up with a pulse that burned the tendrils back, the fog recoiling with an almost sentient hiss. They scrambled aboard, sealing the doors as the creature slammed against the exterior, trying to worm its way inside. In the cockpit, Silva glanced back at Captain Marek, her face pale but defiant. "That signal, it was never meant for us." Marek nodded grimly, looking back at the dead city through the viewfinder, watching as the creature's tendrils reached upward, a desperate, ravenous entity that had consumed everything it once touched. "It was a warning," he said quietly as they ascended, leaving the dead city and its dreadful hunger far behind. Continuation of the story, coming soon.